Welcome back, MVP. Streebo here. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about an independent horror film that's making the rounds out there. Very, very limited theatrical release. What we're talking about, it's not a remake, it's not a sequel, and it is not based on a Japanese one. That's right, we're talking about Hatchet, Adam Green's old school American slasher flick. Hatchet was a lot of fun. It's one part black comedy, one part slasher flick, and a whole lot of 100% fun. The story revolves around some friends that are in New Orleans for Mardi Gras. Now, legend has it, Hatchet was actually the last film that filmed in New Orleans before Katrina hit. So what you see of Mardi Gras there was what it was at its peak before Katrina wiped all that out. Just, FYI kind of thing. Anyway, group of friends, they're in New Orleans having a good time, getting drunk, looking at a lot of naked chicks. One of them's just come off of a bad relationship, and he's decided because of that, he doesn't want to look at naked girls. I don't quite understand that line of thought, because if I'm coming out of a bad relationship, first thing I want to do is, find somebody else to talk to. So nothing helps you forget like looking at some tit, as Streebo likes to say. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But he decides, just hanging around getting drunk on Bourbon Street is not his bag, and he wants to do something different. So he signs himself up to go check out a haunted swamp tour. So he drags one of his friends along. They go on the haunted swamp tour, a bunch of other people. Of course, this is a slasher film, so they got to get stuck, run into a slasher, and they run into an area of the swamp that is supposedly haunted by this figure known as Victor Crowley, Hatchet Face, who was this deformed, basically looked like a little deformed Jason Voorhees kind of kid that was kept in seclusion by his father for years and years and years. Townspeople used to make fun of him. One day they tried to scare him, tried to burn him out of, to scare him with some fireworks. They ended up burning him in his house as part of a prank, a little bite off the old Cropsey legend, but that's okay. That's what slasher films are. Incestuous. We love to take little bits and pieces from everybody else's works and put it into our own. But that's the way the game's played. So that's cool. So the group ends up out in Hatchet Face's area of the swamp. He comes around and starts chopping them up to bits. The film works. It works for me. I mean, I'm an old school slasher fan. I grew up in the Friday the 13th era. Friday the 13th, The Nightmare on Elm Street, The Prowler, The Burning, Hide and Go Shriek, Rituals, Redeemer, The Class Reunion Massacre. There's a whole lot of great slasher flicks out there that Hatchet kind of dips into the well and calls back to a good bit. Humor-wise, I wasn't really feeling the tone of comedy in this film right off the bat. For the first 15 minutes, it didn't have me at all. But since the film actually opens in New Orleans during Mardi Gras, there's boobs everywhere. So that kept me interested for the first 15 minutes. Now, once all the characters actually made it onto the Haunted Swamp tour and started going around, that's when it got more interesting. You settle in with the people and you kind of go with them for the ride. There are no kind of narrative twists or surprises in this flick. It's just a pretty much by-the-numbers slasher flick. Put a bunch of people in a place where they're stuck with a slasher, and the slasher just rips through them. I mean, that's as by-the-numbers as it gets. But the thing is that Hatchet has fun the whole time that it does it. So, starts with blood, ends with boobs. Reverse that. Starts with boobs, ends with blood. It's a lot of fun all the way through. Great gore sets, pieces, and chase sequences all through the ending of the film, and makes it worth watching all the way. Little quick backstory on Hatchet. Supposedly the director Adam Green got the idea for Hatchet when he was a kid going to summer camp. And the counselors used to tell him to stay away from this one particular cabin. Stay away from the cabin. It's haunted. And he said, why? And they said, well, Hatchet Face will get you. And he said, well, why is Hatchet Face there? What's he doing? Like any good, kid that gets excited about horror, he wanted to know more. He didn't want to stay away from it. He wanted to know more. And eventually he found out, the counselors were just, basically messing with him and making stuff up. But that idea of Hatchet Face, of this guy that just wanted to kill people just because you were messing with his cabin, that stuck with Adam Green, and he he worked that into in his mind. He worked that into its own little slasher urban legend, and he held on to it for years and years and years. It sounds like he got some work as a script doctor, did some different screenwriting projects, and then eventually he had the opportunity to turn Hatchet into a screenplay, ship it around, and make it into a flick. Now, the thing that really brought Hatchet to the horror community's attention is that the appearance of two genre stalwarts, Kane Hodder and Robert Englund. They both got involved in the flick fairly early on, and their involvement in some ways was almost like a stamp, a seal of approval for old school slasher fans. That, like, they were saying, okay, this is the next thing. This is the new horror icon. I don't know if I necessarily agree with calling Victor Crowley a horror icon, supposedly, you know, from just this one film, but I will say Hatchet is an enjoyable, gory slasher film. But Englund and Hodder gave it their stamp of approval. They brought in John Carl Buechler, who's famous for doing a lot of the lower end horror flicks and doing the effects in them. They brought him in to do the effects, and he did the gore effects, and he did them right. I mean, it's got all kinds of great stuff, chopping people up, pulling their heads off, and just lots of great gory gruesomeness. That's the part that's really a throwback to the 80s section when they talk about an old school American horror. Good performances from the cast all the way around. I mean, I wasn't too excited by the characters starting out, but the more you spent time with them, the more they grew on you, and you really liked them. Dion Richmond is probably the big standout as the black friend who just has all the funny lines in the movie. I mean, it's great. I won't tell you if he lives or dies or not, you know, but if you know how slasher films, you know how that turns out. But how Hatchet stands up against you know, the slasher parameter is it's got the backstory. Slasher films are supposed to have the backstory, the tortured slasher that was mistreated as a kid usually, and he comes back years later for his revenge. Hatchet has that. Supposed to have a final girl, the virgin that overpowers the killer at the end. There's definitely a final girl running around. Supposed to have isolated locations so you can drop these people out there. They just can't get away and drive off in their cars or use their cell phones to call the police. Does that by dropping them in the swamp. The other ingredient is usually that authority figures and law enforcement officials are pretty ineffectual and ignored. And Hatchet kind of circumvents that problem by just not involving the police. I mean, these people are out in the middle of the swamp. There's no parents. There's no police. There's nobody to help them. So, yeah, it falls into those parameters. All in all, I got to say, you know, 2007 has looked like a fun year for a little minor resurgence of slasher films. I mean, it started the year out with Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, which was a very postmodern, self-referential black comedy slasher, which was just absolutely very funny starting out, and then it got good and spooky by the end of it, and that was really great. And then, of course, Rob Zombie's Halloween, which I think is probably the closest to being the new wave slasher. By the way, it built the story around Michael Myers' backstory and really focused on the face of evil all the way up until his ascension and the night of his return to Haddonfield, where he's, you know, goes on his killing rampage. And now we have Hatchet, which is a very unchallenging slasher film. Just very much, here's people, they're in an isolated place, here's a slasher, let's mix them together. Carnage ensues, hilarity ensues, good times are to be had. Eat your popcorn, drink your drink, squeeze your woman, have a good time. Streebo definitely gives Hatchet a seal of approval. On the Streebo Screamometer, let's go ahead and give Hatchet a 7 out of 10 on Streebo Screamometer. So that's a good rating. Definitely check it out. If you love old school slasher films, you should love Hatchet.